At 74 years old, Walter Haunt stood on his own son's front porch in the freezing November rain and asked for one night. Just one. His coat was soaked through at the shoulders. His suitcase, the brown one with the broken zipper he'd carried since 1968, sat at his feet in a spreading puddle. He had knocked 3 times. He had said the boy's name twice. And then the porch light went dark. The deadbolt slid shut from the inside, and the door he had once painted himself by hand on a Saturday morning 40 years ago closed in his face. This was the man Walter had given everything to. He had given that boy a childhood home. A college fund built one Friday paycheck at a time. A lake house on Cedar Lake worth $400,000. The place where Daniel had learned to swim. The place Walter had promised would always be his. Walter had handed his son a life. And now he stood with $11 in his wallet, a dead wife's wedding ring on a chain around his neck, and nowhere to sleep but a bus stop bench across the street. But Daniel forgot something. In a locked box, in a bank he didn't know existed, his mother left behind one piece of paper. And tomorrow morning, when the police come knocking on that freshly painted door, it will not be his father they take away. 6 months before the rain, Walter Haunt woke every morning at 5:40 without an alarm. He had kept that hour for 51 years, first for the rail yard, then for the machine shop, and long after both were gone, simply because the body remembers what the man taught it. He would put the kettle on, sit at the kitchen table of the small greenhouse on Birch Street, and take apart whatever broken thing the week had brought him. A neighbor's mantel clock, a toaster, a music box with a bent comb. His hands were thick and spotted now, the knuckles swollen, but they still found the screw nobody else could see. He fixed things. That was who he was. He had never once, in 74 years, thrown a working part away. The house was paid off in 1994. Eleanor had chosen the wallpaper in the front room yellow, with small birds, and Walter had never changed it, not in the 4 years since the cancer took her. Her reading glasses still sat folded on the windowsill. Her handwriting still labeled the spice jars. On Sundays, he drove 40 minutes to the cemetery, sat on the grass beside her stone, whatever the weather, and told her about the week. He told her about the clocks. He told her about Daniel. Daniel was the only child they'd made. There had been Clara, before a foster girl they'd kept for 3 years in the 80s, a quiet child who liked to watch Walter work and hand him tools by name, until the county sent her back to a mother who'd gotten clean. Walter had never stopped wondering where she landed. But Daniel was blood, and Daniel was the one who stayed in town. And after Eleanor died, Walter let his son talk him into things. Dad, the property tax on the lake house is killing you. Let me handle it. Let me get my name on the account so I can manage the bills. Walter signed where his son pointed. He always signed. A father who could not trust his own son, Walter believed, had already lost more than money. There were small things he noticed and set aside. A statement from First Cedar Savings that stopped arriving in the mail. A phone call from a man who said he was very excited about the lake property, whom Walter assumed had the wrong number. Daniel coming by less, then only when papers needed signing, always with the engine running in the driveway. Once, Walter overheard his son on the phone in the next room say the words, "Once the old man's not competent," and then laugh, and Walter told himself he had misheard. A son does not say that. He went back to the clock on the table and did not bring it up. What Walter did not know, what he would not learn for months, was that Eleanor had known her son better than he did. In her last year, When the morphine made the nights long, she had asked her daughter-in-law a question across a hospital bed, and the answer had frightened her enough to do something quiet and careful. She had a key made. She wrote a letter in her own steady hand and had it witnessed by the woman 2 doors down, and she said nothing to Walter, because Walter would only have forgiven the boy again. Walter spent that spring fixing a grandfather clock for the church. When the pendulum finally swung true and the chimes rang the hour, he stood back, wiped his hands on the rag in his back pocket, and smiled the way only a man who mends things can smile. He thought the hardest part of his life was already behind him. He was wrong. It had not started yet. It began with a letter dated October 9th. It came not from Daniel, but from a law office in the county seat, Brennan and Cole, attorneys addressed to Walter J. Hauntz in a window envelope, the kind of mail a man holds for a second before opening because some part of him already knows. Inside was a single page. It informed Mr. Hauntz that the property at 14 Cedar Lake Road had been sold on September 22nd, that escrow had closed, and that the new owners would take possession on November 1st. It thanked him for his cooperation. At the bottom, beneath a paragraph he read 4 times without understanding, was a photocopy of a quitclaim deed transferring the property from Walter and Eleanor Hauntz to their son, Daniel Hauntz. Dated 3 years earlier, the signatures were there. His and Eleanor's. Eleanor had been dead for nearly 4 years on the date that deed was signed. Walter put the kettle on out of habit and forgot to light the burner. He sat at the table with the page flat in front of him and did the arithmetic again. Because a man who fixes things looks for the broken part before he panics. The lake house was not Daniel's to sell. It had never left Walter's name. It couldn't have, not legally, not with Eleanor, a joint owner who died before any transfer. Someone had written his dead wife's name in ink, and a notary had stamped it, and a buyer had paid $400,000, and Walter had never seen a cent. He drove to Daniel's house that same afternoon. This was his goal, and he pursued it the only way he knew, directly, in person, with the letter in his hand. He did not raise his voice. He stood in his son's marble-tiled foyer and laid the page on the side table and said, "Explain this to me, son. There's a mistake here. Your mother's name is on a paper she couldn't have signed." Daniel did not look at the letter. He looked at his father with an expression Walter had never seen on him, an expression that had been waiting a long time. "There's no mistake, Dad. You signed everything. Power of attorney, the account, all of it. You don't even remember, do you?" "That's the problem. That's been the problem for 2 years. I remember every screw in every clock I've ever opened," Walter said. "I remember the date your mother died. I do not remember signing away her house. That's exactly what Dr. Reyes said you'd say." Daniel's wife, Megan, stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in her hands and did not move and did not speak, and Walter would only understand the meaning of her stillness much later. "You've got a diagnosis on file, Dad. Early decline. I've been protecting you. Managing things so you don't lose everything to your own confusion. The lake house was a liability. I did what had to be done." Walter picked up his letter, folded it once along the crease, and put it in his coat pocket. "Then I'll get a lawyer. With what money?" Daniel asked. "Not cruelly. Worse than cruelly gently, the way you correct a child. Go home, Dad." Walter got a lawyer the next morning anyway. A young man named Osei in a strip mall office who listened, took the letter, made calls, and called Walter back on the 3rd day with a flat voice. The deed was filed. The diagnosis was on record at Dr. Reyes's clinic, signed and dated. The bank account Walter had co-signed showed years of withdrawals he'd authorized with his own pen. "Miss Hans, I believe you," Osei said. "But believing you and proving fraud are two different mountains, and the second one costs $50,000 in 2 years. You don't have that. I'm sorry, I really am." The fight was over before Walter had landed a single blow. He had pursued his goal, and he had failed. Then came the rest of it, fast, the way a dam goes once the first crack opens. The greenhouse on Birch Street, it turned out, had been refinanced Walter's signature again on a loan he did not remember, taken against the only home he owned outright. The payments had not been made. On a Tuesday, a man from the bank taped a notice to his front door. Walter had 30 days. Eleanor's wallpaper, her folded glasses on the windowsill. The kitchen table where he'd mended 1,000 broken things 30 days. He called his son. Daniel did not answer, which is how Walter Hans came to be standing on his son's porch on the first cold night of November, suitcase at his feet, asking for one night under a roof while he figured out where a 74-year-old man goes when the world has taken his house, his wife's memory, and his name. He knocked 3 times. He said the boy's name twice. The porch light went dark. The deadbolt slid home. Walter crossed the street and sat on the bus stop bench because there was nowhere else, and he turned up his collar against the rain. And somewhere past midnight, he reached inside his coat, not for the letter, but for the chain around his neck, for Eleanor's wedding ring. The one thing they could not take, because no one had thought to ask for it, and that was when he saw, in the streetlight, the small key dotted was threaded onto the chain behind the ring. Brass worn smooth, stamped with a number 047 and 3 words too small to read in the rain. He had worn that chain every day for 4 years and never once turned the ring over to see what hung behind it. Eleanor had put it there. He knew her hands. He knew the way she'd close a clasp. She had put it there and said nothing. And now her dead voice was speaking to him across 4 years from the end of a brass key. And Walter Hans sat alone in the rain on a bench and understood only one thing for certain. His wife had left him something. And his son did not know it existed. Walter did not sleep on the bench. He sat with the brass key pinched between 2 fingers, turning it toward the streetlight every few minutes, as though the 3 small words stamped on its barrel might rearrange themselves into something he could read. By the time the sky went gray at the edges, the rain had thinned to a mist, and a city bus hissed to a stop in front of him. The driver, a heavy-set woman with a thermos in the cup holder, looked at the old man in his soaked suitcase and the puddle around his shoes, and she did not pull away. "You been here all night?" she asked. "Looks that way," Walter said. She let him on without a fare. This was his first step, and he took it the only way a man with $11 can, by accepting a small mercy and using it. He rode that bus to the end of the line and back simply to be warm, and somewhere in the second loop, in the daylight coming through the smeared window, he finally read the 3 words stamped beneath the number on the key. First Cedar Savings. He said it out loud. The driver glanced up in her mirror. "That bank closed years ago," she said. "Bought out. There's still a branch on Halstead. Though same building, new name. Keeps the old boxes in the basement. My mother had one there. Walter got off at Halstead, but here the first trial closed around him, like a hand. The bank was real, the basement vault was real, and the box numbered 047 was real, and Walter could not open it. He had the key. He did not have what the law required. A safe deposit box demands identification matching the registered holder, and the box, the assistant manager explained after 20 minutes at her terminal, was registered solely to Walter J. Hantz. That should have ended it happily. It did not. Because the identification Walter carried his driver's license listed the greenhouse on Birch Street, and Birch Street was in foreclosure. And a flag on his name in a separate county system stopped the young woman cold. "Sir," she said, lowering her voice, "I'm showing a note here. A guardianship petition. Filed by a Daniel Hantz. It says you've been declared. It says I'm supposed to refer any account activity to him. Daniel had not only stolen the house, he had filed to become his father's legal guardian. If that petition went through, Walter would not be able to sign a check, see a doctor, or open a bank box without his son's permission. The box that held Eleanor's secret would pass straight into the hands of the only man on earth who must never open it. Walter walked out of the bank into the cold and stood on the sidewalk with a useless key in his fist. He had found the lock and been forbidden the door. He needed help, and he had no one. He spent the $11 on a phone, a prepaid flip phone from a drugstore, $9.99 plus tax, because a man cannot fight a war without a way to be reached. With the change, he bought a coffee and sat in the public library where it was warm and no one asked questions. And he did the thing he had always done with a broken machine. He looked for the part that still worked. The part that still worked was a name. Years ago, before everything, Eleanor had kept a battered address book in the kitchen drawer, and Walter had grabbed it without thinking when he packed his suitcase, the way you grab the familiar when the world ends. He turned its soft pages now under the library lamp. Most of the names were dead or moved. But near the back, in Eleanor's hand, was an entry that stopped him. Clara and a phone number, and beneath it, 3 words his wife had underlined twice. She found us. Clara, the foster girl, the quiet child who had handed him tools by name. Eleanor had found her, or Clara had found Eleanor, and Walter had never been told. He understood, sitting there, that his wife in her last year had been quietly building something he was only now walking into. He dialed the number from the flip phone. It rang 4 times. A woman answered. "Wary," he said. "My name is Walter Hantz. You probably don't remember me. A long time ago, my wife Eleanor and I remember the workbench," the woman said. Her voice cracked on the second word. "I remember you let me use the small screwdriver, the yellow one, and you never once told me to be careful with it. You just trusted me with it." A long breath. "Mr. Hantz, I've been trying to reach you for 4 years. Eleanor wrote to me. Before she passed, she wrote me letters. Where are you? Tell me where you are right now." This was the unexpected ally, and the reason she came was the oldest reason there is. 40 years ago, a man had handed a frightened child a tool and trusted her not to break it, and the child had never forgotten what it felt like to be trusted. Clara Vance now, 46. A paralegal 2 towns over with a spare room and a stubborn streak drove 90 minutes that same afternoon and found Walter on the library steps and did not shake his hand. She put her arms around the wet old man on the cold concrete and held on, and Walter, who had not been touched with tenderness since Eleanor died, stood very still and let her. Then Clara, who read legal documents for a living, said, "Show me everything. The letter, the deed, and whatever's on that key." The building began that night at Clara's kitchen table, and the town would soon have plenty to say about it. Because Walter Hantz was no fool, and neither was the woman he'd once trusted with a screwdriver. They laid the pieces out under the light, The lawyer's letter, the photocopied quitclaim with Eleanor's impossible signature, the guardianship flag, the foreclosure notice, the brass key to box 047. Clara photographed each one with her phone and made copies and started a binder, the way she'd been trained to, a tab for every document. Fraud leaves a paper trail, she said. It has to. You can't steal $400,000 with one signature. You need a notary, a title company, a buyer, a recorder's office. Every one of those is a witness your son couldn't pay off, because most of them don't know they witnessed anything. She tapped the quitclaim. And this. Your wife died in 2020. This is dated 2021. That's not a gray area, Walter. That's a forged instrument on a public record. That's a felony with your son's name printed at the bottom. But the town did not see a paper trail. The town saw a confused old man in a borrowed coat being driven around by a strange woman, and Daniel made sure of the rest. By the end of that first week, the story had been told before Walter could tell it. At the diner, at the hardware store, at church, the version that traveled was Daniel's. Poor Daniel, the devoted son, finally forced to step in because his father's mind was going. Because the old man had started signing things and forgetting. Because someone had to protect the family money before Walter gave it all away. And now, can you believe it? Some woman has shown up and gotten her hooks into him, just like Daniel feared. People who had known Walter for 50 years looked at the ground when he passed. The pharmacist who had filled Eleanor's prescriptions for 2 decades gently suggested Walter let his son handle things, yet Walter did not argue with any of them. He had learned long ago that you cannot talk a man out of a story he finds comfortable. Instead, he worked. While Clara filed an emergency objection to the guardianship petition, buying time, freezing Daniel's power for 30 days, while a court looked at it, Walter did the one thing he could still do better than anyone alive. He fixed things for money to earn his own keep. He put a hand-lettered card in the laundromat window. Clocks, small appliances, anything with gears. Repaired cheap. Ask for Walter. The first job was a woman's stopped wall clock. He charged her $4 and returned it running. The second was a man's drill. By the end of the second week, the back corner of Clara's garage had become a workbench and a small, quiet stream of broken things, and the cash that came with them began to flow to the old man the town had written off. The midpoint came on a Thursday, and it came the way Daniel did everything, through paper and through the law, and aimed at the throat that Clara's emergency objection had frozen the guardianship, so Daniel changed weapons. A process server found Walter at the laundromat and handed him 2 documents. The first was a restraining order petition alleging that Walter was a vulnerable adult being financially exploited by Clara Vance, and that he should be removed from her care and placed in a county facility pending evaluation. The second was worse. Daniel, through Brennan and Cole, had filed to expedite the guardianship on emergency grounds, attaching a sworn letter from Dr. Reyes restating the diagnosis and a new affidavit signed by Daniel, claiming his father had begun wandering, confabulating about hidden bank boxes, and making paranoid accusations of forgery. Daniel had taken the truth the key, the box, the forgery, and reframed it as the proof of Walter's madness. If the court believed it, Walter would be declared incompetent within days, Clara's objection would be void, and the box at First Cedar would open into Daniel's hand. Walter read both pages standing in the laundromat with the dryers turning behind him. Then he folded them along the crease, the way he folded everything, and drove back to Clara's, and for the first time since the rain, his hands were not steady. "He's going to win," Walter said. "He has a doctor. He has paper. I have a key I can't even use." Clara did not answer right away. She was looking at her phone, which had been buzzing for the last 10 minutes with a number she didn't recognize. She'd let it go to voicemail twice. Now she played it on speaker, and a woman's voice filled the small kitchen low, shaking. The voice of someone making a call from a closet with the door shut. "Clara, you don't know me. My name is Megan. I'm Daniel's wife. I've been watching what he's doing to his father, and I can't anymore. I have things, documents, the real ones. I've been keeping them for years because I always knew this day would come." A pause, a breath, the sound of a door somewhere in the house. Eleanor knew too. Before she died, she asked me to my face if Daniel forged her signature, and I told her the truth. I told her everything, and she made a recording. She made me say it on tape. It's in the box at the bank, box 47. And I have a key too. She had two made, one for Walter and one for me. Please call me back. I want to make this right before I lose my nerve. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere in the garage, a clock Walter had repaired that morning chimed the half hour, true and clear. The plan had not just been stopped. It had reversed. The strongest witness against Daniel Hauntz was the woman sleeping in his bed, and she had been collecting the evidence to bury him since before his mother died. This was the second resource, and it was bigger than a key. Megan drove to Clara's that night after Daniel fell asleep, headlights off as she rolled up the drive, a child's shoebox on the passenger seat. Inside it, the original notary log page Daniel had bribed loose and assumed destroyed, printed emails between Daniel and Dr. Reyes's office discussing how to document decline in a man who showed none, a second brass key, twin to Walter's, and, on top, a single folded sheet in Eleanor's unmistakable hand that Megan had carried for 4 years and never delivered. She set the box on the table next to Clara's binder and looked at Walter, really looked at him, this old man whose house and name her husband had stolen, and she said the things she had come to say. He told everyone, "You had dementia, Walter. I have the emails where he asked the doctor to write it down. You were never confused. You were never going. He needed you to be, so I let him think I believed it." Her voice did not break this time. Eleanor trusted me with the truth because she couldn't trust her own son. I'm done betraying her by staying quiet. The major obstacle had been the guardianship, the legal fiction that Walter Hauntz was not competent to control his own life. Megan's emails did not merely dent it, they detonated it. Clara spread the printed messages across the table, dated and time-stamped, in Daniel's own words, asking a physician to manufacture a diagnosis. With those in hand, the restraining order became laughable, and the emergency guardianship became evidence of the very fraud it was meant to conceal. Clara was already typing, already drafting the motion that would not defend Walter, but accuse Daniel, and now, with 2 key holders, 2 sworn witnesses, and a recorded voice waiting in a vault, she had the one thing she'd been missing all week. She had the right to open box 047. Tomorrow morning, Clara said, closing the binder. Both keys, both of you on the registry. They can't refuse 2 key holders and a notarized objection on file. We go to the bank and we find out exactly what Eleanor left her husband. She looked at Walter. She built this for you. 4 years ago, knowing she was dying, she built you a way out. All you have to do is walk in and pick it up. Walter turned the brass key over in his fingers one last time. And for the first time since the porch light went dark, the old man smiled the small, certain smile of a man who has finally found the part that still works. They were waiting at the door of the bank on Halstead when it opened at 9.2 key holders, 2 licenses, Clara's notarized objection to the guardianship, and a manila folder thick enough that the assistant manager stopped arguing halfway through her own sentence. She led them down a narrow stair into the basement vault, where the air was cool and smelled of paper and old metal. And she fitted the bank's guard key into one slot, while Walter, with a hand that did not shake this time, fitted box 047's brass key into the other. The 2 keys turned together. The long drawer slid free of the wall with a sound like a held breath finally let go. Inside was a child's amount of things, which is how the most important things usually arrive. A certified original deed to 14 Cedar Lake Road, raised seal intact, naming Walter and Eleanor Hantz as joint tenants with right of survivorship, the true document. The one Daniel had assumed lived only in a filing cabinet he'd long since emptied. A single sheet in Eleanor's hand, dated and witnessed by the neighbor 2 doors down. That began, "To whoever finds my husband alone," and Walter could not read past the first line standing up, so Clara took it gently from him and read the rest into the quiet. And beneath both, in a small paper sleeve, a cassette tape labeled in ballpoint for Walter. "Play if Daniel ever lies." Megan had brought a tape player. They did not play it in the vault. They played it that night at Clara's kitchen table, the 3 of them around it, and when Eleanor's voice came out of the little speaker thinner than Walter remembered, but hers, unmistakably hers, the voice that had labeled the spice jars, the old man put both hands flat on the table and bowed his head and let it come. His wife, dead 4 years, named the date. Named the forged signature as her own that was not her own. Named Megan as the witness who told her the truth across a hospital bed. And then, at the end, she said, "Walter, my love, I couldn't stop him while I was alive without breaking you. So I left you the proof and trusted you to be stronger than I was. Fix this. You always could fix anything." The forgotten thing was no longer hidden. It was in their hands, certified and sealed, and recorded in a dead woman's voice, and it was beginning to do what Eleanor had built it to do. Clara worked through that weekend the way Walter fixed clocks methodically, no wasted motion. She did not file a defense. She went on the attack. The motion she submitted Monday morning did 3 things at once. It produced the certified original deed as conclusive proof that the September sale was void, since Daniel had never owned the property he sold. It attached the forged 2021 quitclaim against Eleanor's death certificate, showing she had died in 2020. And it entered Daniel's own emails to Dr. Reyes's office into the record, requesting the manufacture of a diagnosis. Then she did what Walter had not dared to hope for. She walked the whole binder, copies of everything, across the street to the county prosecutor's office and filed a criminal complaint for forgery, fraud, and elder financial exploitation. A felony with Daniel's name printed at the bottom. The town began to turn, the way towns do slowly, and then all at once it started with the notary. The young woman whose stamp sat on the forged deed had not known the signature was false, and when an investigator from the prosecutor's office showed her Eleanor's death certificate, she went pale and produced her logbook, and her logbook did not match the deed. And now she was a witness with everything to lose and nothing to gain by protecting Daniel Hantz. Then the title company's escrow officer, terrified of liability, handed over the full file. Then the pharmacist who had filled Eleanor's prescriptions for 20 years heard from the notary's cousin what had really happened, and the next time Walter came in, the man came out from behind the counter and shook his hand and said, in front of 3 customers, "I owe you an apology, Walter, and I'll say it loud enough for anyone who wants to hear it." Word of that traveled faster than any of Daniel's stories had. By the end of the week, the diner had a new version, and in this one, Walter was not a confused old man being taken advantage of. He was a father who had been robbed and who was getting up off the bench to fight back. The broken things came faster now. Whether out of guilt or kindness or simple changed opinion, half the town seemed to have a clock that had stopped or a lamp that flickered, and they brought them to the laundromat window and asked for Walter, and they paid more than he charged. He took every job. He kept the cash in a coffee can and the receipts in a shoebox of his own now, because a man rebuilding his name keeps records. But Daniel was not finished, and the story did not pretend otherwise. He still had the lawyers. He still had the foreclosure on the greenhouse grinding forward on its own machinery, because Clara's motion had frozen the guardianship and voided the lake sale, but it had not yet undone the loan taken against Birch Street, and the bank that held that paper did not care who had forged what they wanted to be paid. The 30 days were nearly up, and Daniel, cornered, did the thing a cornered man does. He changed his story to fit the new facts. Through Brennan and Cole, he now claimed that yes, mistakes had been made. But they were Megan's mistakes that his wife, unstable and vengeful over a failing marriage, had forged the documents herself and was now framing him. He filed for divorce the same afternoon and named Megan as the architect of the entire fraud, and for one cold evening, it looked as though he might find purchase, because Megan had no certified original to her name, and a husband's word still carries weight in a small county courtroom. That night, Megan sat at Clara's table with her hands wrapped around a cold mug and said quietly, "He's going to make it all mine. He's good at this. He's always been good at making things mine." Clara slid the cassette player to the center of the table and pressed rewind. "Then we let your mother-in-law answer him," she said, "from the one place he can't reach her." She let the tape play to the end again, to the date, to the name. To Eleanor saying, "Megan told me the truth, and I believed her," and then she clicked it off and looked at the two of them across the table, the robbed father and the guilty wife who had become his witness. "The hearing is Thursday," Clara said. "He'll be there with his lawyers and his new story. And we are going to walk into that room with a certified deed, a notary's log, a doctor's emails, a death certificate, and a recording of his own mother naming his crime." She closed the binder for the last time. Let him talk. Eleanor gets the last word. The hearing was held in courtroom 2 on a Thursday morning, and Daniel arrived first in a gray suit, flanked by 2 attorneys from Brennan and Cole, carrying himself like a man who had won rooms like this before. He had a story ready. He had practiced it. When Walter came in on Clara's arm in his one good jacket with the broken zipper suitcase left behind at last, Daniel did not look at his father. He looked at the judge. He told his story well. His voice caught at the right moments. His wife, he said, had grown unstable, had forged documents to ruin him, had poisoned his elderly father against him, had manufactured this entire nightmare out of spite. He had only ever tried to protect his family's assets and his father's failing mind. He asked the court for its sympathy. For a moment, a long, cold moment, the room seemed willing to give it. Then Clara stood, and she did not argue, because this was not a fight. It was a revelation, and she let the evidence do the speaking, one piece at a time, in the order Eleanor would have wanted. She entered the death certificate first. Eleanor Hantz, deceased, 2020, She entered the quitclaim deed next, the one that transferred the lake house with Eleanor's signature, dated 2021. She set the 2 pages side by side on the clerk's table and said only, "The court will note that Mrs. Hauntz signed this deed 13 months after she died. She entered the certified original deed, raised seal intact, joint tenancy with right of survivorship, proof that the property had never been Daniel's to sell. That the $400,000 sale had been the disposal of something he never owned." She entered Daniel's emails to Dr. Reyes's office, printed and time-stamped in his own words, asking a physician to document decline in a man who had none. The judge read those slowly. The judge read them twice. And then Clara set a small cassette player on the table, and she said, "Your Honor, the petitioner has claimed his wife forged these documents. The decedent, his mother, anticipated that he might one day lie. She left this. With permission, I'd like to let her respond. Daniel was on his feet before the first word. One of his own attorneys put a hand on his arm and did not let him sit down again, and that the lawyer's hand, the way it moved, was the moment the room understood. Before the tape even played, what was about to come out of it came out thin and clear and unmistakably hers. Eleanor Hauntz named the date, named the forged signature, named the man who had written her name in ink while she lay dying, named Megan as the witness who had come to her in fear and told her the truth. And at the end, in the silent courtroom, Eleanor said, "I left you the proof and trusted you to be stronger than I was. Fix this. You always could fix anything." Walter, in the second row, closed his eyes. There was no gavel-banging collapse, no shouted confession. It was quieter and more total than that. Daniel's lead attorney asked for a recess and did not get one. The judge set down the emails, looked at Daniel Hauntz over the top of her glasses, and the look itself was the verdict. The guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice. The restraining order against Clara was dismissed. The September sale of the lake house was declared void, the property restored to Walter's name. And the judge, having heard a recording of a dead woman name a forgery, having held a deed signed by a corpse, ordered the entire file referred to the prosecutor, already waiting in the back of the room with Clara's criminal complaint in his hand. Daniel was not let out in handcuffs that day. The law moves slower than the movies. But he walked out of courtroom too. A man whose story had died in front of everyone who'd believed it, and within the month the forgery charges were filed, and the buyer's money clawed back, and the divorce he'd weaponized turned on him when Megan's documents became the state's documents. Outside the courthouse, on the steps where the November cold had finally broken into something like spring. Daniel caught up to his father. Whatever he had practiced in the gray suit was gone. "Dad," he said. "Dad, I'll lose everything. The house, the firm, I could go to prison. You can still call them off. You're my father. You can tell them you forgive me." Walter Hauntz looked at his son for a long moment. He looked at him the way he looked at a machine he finally understood, without anger now. Only a clear and final seeing. "I forgive you," Walter said, and Daniel's face moved toward relief. "I forgive you because your mother asked me to be stronger than my own heart, and carrying this any further would cost me more than it costs you. So I forgive you, son." He buttoned his jacket against the wind. "But I will not save you. Eleanor left me the truth, not a key to your cage. What happens to you now, you built. One signature at a time. I only fixed what you broke." He turned and walked down the steps to where Clara was waiting, and he did not look back. And the choice he had made was not mercy, and it was not revenge. It was the thing a man does when he has finally stopped trying to fix the one thing that was never his to fix. The shop on Maple Street opened the following spring. It is a narrow storefront between a florist and a shoe repair place, and the brass sign above the door was lettered by hand Walter's hand. Steady again, one letter at a time over 3 evenings. Haunts and daughter. The word daughter is not a legal fact. It is a truer thing than that. Clara runs the books in the front counter, Walter runs the bench in the back, and on the wall above the bench, in a plain frame, hangs the certified original deed to the lake house at Cedar Lake, the paper Eleanor mailed into a vault, entrusted her husband to find. He never moved into the lake house. He rents it out to a young family with 2 children who swim off the same dock where Daniel once learned. And the rent does not go into a coffee can anymore. It goes into the back room of the shop, which Walter cleared and swept and filled with workbenches low enough for short arms. On Saturday mornings, the neighborhood children come 6 of them, then 9, then a dozen, and Walter teaches them to take apart the broken things their families would have thrown away, and to find the one part that still works, and to make it run again. He hands each new child a small screwdriver and tells them to be careful with it. Then he stops and corrects himself and says instead, "I trust you with it." Clara, at the counter, pretends not to hear him every time. He wakes at 5:40 without an alarm. He puts the kettle on and he lights the burner. Eleanor's reading glasses sit folded on the windowsill of the small apartment above the shop, beside her wedding ring, which he wears on the chain still, the brass key gone now to a frame of its own. On Sundays, he drives out to the cemetery and sits on the grass beside her stone, whatever the weather. And he tells her about the week. He tells her about the clocks. He tells her about the children. And the ones who are getting good. Daniel drove past the shop once, that first summer. He slowed the car in front of the window where the lettered sign hangs, and the bell waits over the door. He sat at the curb for a moment with the engine running. The way he had always kept an engine running in his father's driveway. Walter was at the bench, a stopped clock open under his hands, a child beside him holding the yellow screwdriver. He did not look up. Outside, the car pulled away. Inside, the clock began, very softly, to tick. The bell over the door rang. Walter wiped his hands on the rag in his back pocket and turned to the next customer.